After my rebirth, my younger half-sister stole my jade pendant and accidentally revealed it in public. That's when I knew she had also been reborn. The next day, matchmakers from the Marquis household arrived at our door. Only then did everyone realize that my younger half-sister was the beloved the young master had searched for over 3 years, disregarding her lowly status as a concubine's daughter. The young master insisted on marrying her as his wife. The Wen family, however, were merely ordinary officials. Even as a concubine, my half-sister's status was considered a significant step up. The world marveled at the young master's deep affection and my half-sister's good fortune. Sympathetic glances were cast my way. The legitimate elder sister. Little did they know, this was all my doing. Main text. The concubine was beaming with joy at home. Her daughter had become the future young master's wife, and her own status naturally rose with the tide. No sooner had the Marquis household sent their betrothal gifts than the concubine and Wen Yan hurriedly summoned me to the front hall. The moment I entered, Wen Yan pulled the concubine down to kneel before father. Father, sister, Yin Yan has an unreasonable request. Father rushed forward to lift them up. What are you doing? We're all family, speak plainly. Wen Yan refused to rise, instead turning to face me with intense eyes. Sister, I am now the future wife of the Marquis heir. If mother remains a concubine, it would make our Wen family appear disrespectful to the Marquis household. Therefore, I earnestly beg you to consent to father elevating mother to the position of legitimate wife. I narrowed my eyes and looked at father. His gaze flickered, and he turned his head away from me. I understood. He agreed with this too. After all, these past years, if not for Mai's legitimate daughter of noble birth standing in the way, he likely would have elevated the concubine to principal wife long ago. In my past life, craving the pitiful remnants of my father's affection, I would have agreed, however unwillingly, but not this time. I knelt slowly, performing a deep bow before father. Then I turned to Wen Yan. Sister, such words are too kind. For a matter of this gravity, father's consent alone suffices. But father has just been promoted to Vice Minister of Rights. Elevating a concubine to principal wife now would inevitably tarnish his reputation. The emperor holds ritual propriety in the highest regard. If those with ulterior motives were to seize upon this fave, or valued his career above all else. His face darkened at these words. Wen Yan, unwilling to concede, opened her mouth to protest, but was swiftly pulled back by her stepmother. Her stepmother spoke softly, maintaining the image of a gentle, unassuming woman father had always cherished. Yue speaks with reason. Yin Yan, I know you are devoted, but your father's career is the foremost priority for the Wen family. Father looked at the concubine with approval. You truly understand me, Yaon Young. Rest assured, I will never treat you unfairly. The concubine gave a coy smile. I certainly wouldn't let them have their way so easily. I spoke slowly. One thing Yin Yu is right about. As the future wife of the heir, one must be cautious in speech and conduct. A concubine is a concubine. If others were to hear you called mother, it would surely be a laughingstock. Then it might even bring shame upon father, the Minister of Rights. The identical, charmingly delicate faces of Wen Yanyu and the concubine instantly turned ashen. I turned to my father, whose expression had darkened at my earlier words. As sisters, we share in each other's honor and disgrace. Tomorrow I shall write to grandmother, requesting she send one of her maids to teach Yen Yen proper etiquette. What do you think? Father nodded, then swept his sleeves and left. After father departed, Wen Yan gave me a cold, disdainful snort. I merely lowered my head and smiled softly. Wen Yan believed she had married a good husband, unaware that what awaited her was not splendor and wealth, but a nightmare like hell. Grandmother soon sent Song Mam to us. Seeing Song Mam's much younger appearance, my eyes stung with tears. In my past life, when I married the crown prince, grandmother had also sent Song Mam as my dowry attendant. Madam Song taught me how to be a proper wife to the crown prince and how to serve my mother-in-law. Yet she never approved of the concubine and Wen Yan, her daughter. She often urged me to keep my distance from them, which inevitably left a bitter taste in my mouth. Over time, I grew distant from her and eventually sent her away to the country estate. Fortunately, in my previous life, she was at the estate and did not witness how that husband, the crown prince, later mistreated me after my death. As my dowry nanny, she came to collect my body and handle my funeral arrangements. The Xinyang Marquis household was adept at putting on a show, though Nanny Song harbored doubts about the cause of my death. She could find no fault and could only return to my maternal grandmother. Yet no one knew that after my death, my spirit lingered in the mortal realm for some time. The Xinyang Marquis household publicly declared I had died of a sudden illness, to demonstrate the young master's deep affection. They even proposed that Wen Yan, still unmarried, become his second wife. Wen Yan was naturally overjoyed. As a commoner's daughter, marrying into such a prestigious family was already a rare opportunity. With this stroke of luck, she readily accepted. It was then she learned the truth. The young master had only sought to marry me because he recognized the jade pendant I wore, identifying me as his savior. So in this lifetime, she schemed to steal my jade pendant. My spirit finally dissipated on the day of her wedding to the young master. When I opened my eyes again, I had returned to the time before the crown prince's proposal. Wen Yan had taken advantage of my drunkenness at the banquet to steal my jade pendant on the carriage ride back. She believed her scheme was flawless, unaware that I had allowed it to happen deliberately. Her repeated attempts to test the jade pendant on my body had long since alerted me. However, the very notion of rebirth was too fantastical. I wasn't certain if Wen Yan felt the same, so I deliberately feigned drunkenness to lure her into a trap, when she indeed made a move for the jade pendant. My suspicions were confirmed. It seems she never knew the true cause of my death when she married into the Xinyang Marquis household. Since she's so eager to marry there this lifetime, I won't stand in her way. I'll even help push things along. I sat nearby, watching as Matron Song instructed Wen Yan in etiquette and protocol, perhaps pushed too far by Matron Song. Wen Yan abruptly plopped down and pointed at me, demanding, "Why doesn't she have to learn?" Matron Song started to step forward, but I stopped her. I then proceeded to demonstrate the very etiquette maidservant Song had just taught, performing it with grace and poise right before Wen Yan. Maidservant Song shot me an approving glance, but Wen Yan clenched her lips tightly. "You must have learned this before." I refused to accept it. I paid her no mind, instead stepping closer and whispering softly in her ear, "Sister is correct. My mother hailed from the Chui clan of Qinghe, where propriety was paramount. These manners were ingrained in me from childhood, unlike you, who only learned how to win a man's favor from your mother." Wen Yan trembled with fury, pointing at me. "When you don't gloat. I am the future heiress of the Marquis household." "Oh, is that so?" I motioned for Nanny Song to withdraw, then turned to Wen Yan with a smile. "What? Because you got something in your past life by being a concubine, and this time your elder sister graciously gave it to you early. You've suddenly forgotten your place." Wen Yan's eyes widened in disbelief. I had no intention of hiding that I knew about Wen Yan's rebirth. Rebirth doesn't mean a new mind, but Wen Yan clearly didn't see it that way. After her initial panic, her expression quickly returned to normal. "Regardless, I am now the future heiress of the Xinyang Marquis household. Sister will likely have to find another suitable husband." Wen Yan looked at me haughtily. "Over the years, the father favored the concubine and let her manage the household. The dowry mother left me remained beyond her reach. All she could meddle with were the profits from the estates and shops. Even though the concubine poured all her energy into raising Wen Yan, providing her with the finest food, clothing, and necessities, the deep-rooted heritage of a noble family was undeniable. Wen Yan always harbored resentment about this. Well then, sister offers her heartfelt wishes for you and the crown prince to harmonize like Qin and Se, and to grow old together in blissful union." I bowed slightly, shot Wen Yan a meaningful glance, and turned to leave. Harmonize like Qin and Se. Grow old together in blissful union. How could that ever be possible? The Crown Prince of Xinjiang has long had an unspeakable beloved. In my previous life, I only learned at death's door why my once gentle husband suddenly became a different man. The Xinjiang Marquis household was as eager as in my past life. The rituals of betrothal, naming, auspicious date selection, dowry presentation, and wedding date confirmation were all completed. Awaiting only the wedding procession, Miss Mingli of the Xinjiang Marquis household sent an invitation to our home, inviting Wen Yan and me to attend the floral banquet at the mansion. Just as in my past life, the only difference was that in my previous life, Wen Yan, being a concubine's daughter, was not included on the invitation list. She had always harbored resentment over this. On the day of the banquet, Wen Yan dressed up meticulously, determined to redeem herself. But what did it matter? This time, it wasn't me who was marrying into the family. Upon entering the mansion, we encountered Lady Qing of the Xinjiang Marquis household. The Marquis' wife had suffered a shock years ago, leaving her in a dazed state, never venturing outside. Thus, the old Marquis of Xinjiang took a secondary wife. This Lady Qing before Yuzhen Mingli was her daughter. Lady Qing was skilled in social graces, showering Wen Yan and me with praise before removing 2 pairs of bracelets from her wrists to present to us. I knew, however, that though the jade bracelets appeared similar, the pair given to Wen Yan had been Lady Qing's own dowry. Mingli had begged for them for ages, but Lady Qing had never given them to her. In my past life, this pair only reached me on the 2nd day after the wedding. This time, they were gifted much earlier. Seeing Mingli's displeased expression beside me, I understood immediately. It seemed that by this point in this life, Lady Qing and Mingli had already developed a rift over the Crown Prince Mingzi. This was an opportunity to suppress her. It appeared that living again had indirectly altered many things. At the very least, in my previous life, they had maintained peaceful relations until after Mingzi and I were married. After bidding Lady Qing farewell, Mingli led us toward the garden to join the other noble ladies. Halfway there, however, a maid hurried over. Mingli frowned slightly, apologized to us, and then left in haste. The maid she left behind continued to guide us to the garden. The garden was filled with young ladies from prominent families in the capital. Given the Wen household standing, we didn't know any of them, but these young women were naturally sociable. Knowing Wen Yan was the future wife of the young master, they approached her the moment she entered the garden. Wen Yan handled them with ease, quickly becoming one of the group before leading them away. As she departed, Wen Yan shot me a triumphant raised eyebrow. I pretended not to notice and walked off to the side. As the future wife of the Crown Prince, Wen Yan quickly became the center of attention. She moved with grace and charm, her smile radiant a testament to the excellent training she received from Nanny Song. Just then, I caught sight of Mingli's figure darting past the garden entrance. For the head of the household not to appear at such a moment was already peculiar. Arriving only to depart hastily was even stranger. But then I recalled something. In my previous life, around this time, an uninvited guest had arrived at the Xinjiang Marquis residence. The matter had been suppressed by Lady Qing and Mingzi working together. So few knew of it. Coincidentally, after I married into the family, I overheard the young master mention it once when he was drunk. Yet he always kept a guard up around me, so I never learned the visitor's identity. Only from Mingzi's tone could I tell he held this person in high regard. I couldn't pinpoint the exact date, only that it was around the time of that banquet in my past life. Seeing Mingli like this now, could it be today? My gaze instinctively fell on Wen Yan, though she was surrounded by noble ladies. Her eyes kept darting toward me. An idea struck me: we not take a chance and make Mingzi dislike Wen Yan early. I pretended to be anxious, pacing a few times to draw her attention before rising to leave the banquet. True to my expectations, Wen Yan followed. The big fish had taken the bait. My steps grew light as I headed toward the front courtyard. Circling around the matrons guarding the flower hall, I guided Wen Yan toward the source of an argument nearby. Reaching the doorway, I relied on my past life memories to hide in a blind spot of the nearby corridor. Soon, Wen Yan, having lost sight of me, appeared anxiously and was drawn toward the commotion. A startled cry of bang echoed, followed by a woman's scream. With a smug smile, Wen Yan pushed open the door. The blind spot in the corridor had been designed by the late Marquis of Xinyang, offering a perfect vantage point to glimpse inside. Wen Yan had expected to catch me in some misdeed, but instead found a man and woman with panicked expressions and a figure lying in a pool of blood on the floor. The couple were none other than Ming Li and Crown Prince Ming Zhe. Their clothes were disheveled. Wen Yuan stumbled back in disbelief. Turning to flee, Ming Li reacted swiftly, grabbing her hair and yanking her back. Wen Yuan's shriek snapped Mingze out of his daze. With lightning speed, Mingze delivered a karate chop to her neck. Wen Yuan collapsed limply to the floor. Only at the very end of my previous life did I learn that Mingze, the heir of the Xinyang Marquis, had been in love with his own blood sister, Ming Li. Meanwhile, Lady Qing harbored an unspeakable affection for the young master. After the old Marquis of Xinyang passed away, the already tangled relationships within the Xinyang Marquis household became even more chaotic. The only thing they could agree upon was to have Mingze marry me. First, to conceal the truth. Second, to ensure Mingze could smoothly inherit the Marquis title after marriage. As for the so-called benefactor and jade pendant, they were nothing more than a ploy devised by the Ming family to ensure their long-term union. What they coveted was my status as the eldest legitimate daughter of the Wen family, orphaned of my mother since childhood, though our family standing was somewhat inferior. My mother hailed from the esteemed Shui clan of Qinghe. My father, recently promoted to Assistant Minister of Rights, possessed a gentle disposition and stood alone without powerful connections, making him exceedingly easy to manipulate. In my previous life, I foolishly believed Mingze cherished me because of that jade pendant. After entering his household, I served my husband, attended to my mother-in-law, and managed the household affairs with utmost care and consideration. Whenever Mingze spent the night in my quarters, Mingli and Lady Qing would inevitably make life difficult for me the next day. But the thought of Mingze caught between us made me endure it all, until I finally died of depression. The Wen family, however, only saw my outward splendor, especially Wen Yan and my stepmother. Whenever they returned to their parents' home, they would taunt me openly and subtly. Watching Mingze hoist Wen Yan onto his shoulder, a faint smile touched my lips. I wondered if Wen Yan, who had envied my marriage into the Marquis household in my past life, would regret everything once she awoke to the truth. Mingli stayed behind to bind the fallen figure, tidying everything before locking the door and leaving. After all, a banquet awaited outside. The host family's prolonged absence would be hard to justify. Only after Mingli had been gone for some time did I emerge from my hiding spot. Pulling the hairpin from my hair, I swiftly unlocked the door. This lockpicking skill was something I'd mastered in my previous life when Mingze often locked me away. Little did I know that in this new life, it would come in handy here. The moment I stepped inside, a thick, pungent smell of blood hit me, pinching my nose. I peered over. The figure lay bound and bloodied on the floor, barely clinging to life. Could it be that this man had died here in my previous life? Without a trace. My heart skipped a beat. I rushed over, reaching out to check his breath. But the moment my hand extended, it was seized by a large, icy hand. Startled, I instinctively tried to scream, only to have my mouth clamped shut. "Don't make a sound, and I'll let you go," the person whispered in my ear. I nodded frantically, and only then did he release me. Still shaken, I stared at the figure before me. The man who had been bound and gagged had somehow freed himself. Now, his handsome phoenix-like eyes were fixed on me. Miss Wen, unnoticed, he had positioned himself to block the door, cutting off my escape. For the first time, I felt regret. I had only been reborn once, yet I'd been so arrogant as to dare pry into the Marquis's secrets. Clearly, I should have stayed far away this lifetime. But now that things had come to this, I could only force myself to remain calm. You recognize me. If my information is correct, you were meant to be the future heir's consort of this Marquis, he stated without hesitation, making me wonder if he too had been reborn. Yet his expression gave nothing away, and he offered me no chance to probe further, continuing on his own accord. All right. You needn't stare at me like that, since I've revealed your secret. To be fair, I'll share one of mine with you. I instinctively began to refuse. I am the true heir of this Marquis. For a moment, I felt like crying without tears. Sorry. But I really didn't want to know the secret. At least not right now. Miss Wen, you and I are now in the same boat. We'll need to help each other out from now on. Even after returning to the banquet, that man's shameless face still haunted my thoughts. Gritting my teeth, I slammed the teacup down on the table before me. Just then, when Yen returned, supported by a maid of the Xinjiang Marquis household, her robes had been changed, and her makeup was more vibrant than before. Yet her expression was utterly exhausted. Mingli hurried to greet her, smiling as she pulled her to a seat. When Yen instinctively flinched before bowing to Mingli, yet Mingli seemed oblivious to this obvious distance. Just as she had been before the banquet began, she affectionately linked arms with Wen Yen. Presenting themselves as inseparable sisters, Mingli formally introduced the future heiress of the Xinjiang Marquis household to the noble ladies present, instantly igniting a flurry of excitement throughout the banquet. After the banquet concluded, Mingli excused herself, claiming she needed to speak with Wen Yen privately. I boarded the carriage alone and waited a long while before Wen Yen finally climbed aboard. Though still listless, the moment the carriage moved away, she violently hurled a teacup from the carriage table at me. Did you know about this Marquis's filthy secrets in a past life? The carriage compartment was cramped. I couldn't dodge in time and was drenched in scalding tea. But so what? Sister, have you forgotten? You were the one who wanted to steal the jade pendant. You were the one who wanted to be the benefactor. What does any of this have to do with me? I sneered coldly, enraged. When Yen lunged forward, her long nails extended, aiming to scratch my face. I snapped sharply. Sister, have you forgotten what Nanny Song taught us? Do you intend to fight with your sister in the street? Only then did Wen Yen regain her senses, glaring at me fiercely. Once we returned to the manor, it'll make you regret this. By the time we reached the Wen residence, the lanterns were just beginning to glow. The moment we dismounted the carriage, Wen Yen stormed straight toward the main courtyard. Today was her first visit to the Marquis of Xinjiang's residence. Father and the concubine were surely waiting. Wen Yen knew to play the victim first, but she didn't know to strike first. Once inside the estate, I deliberately messed up my hair and scratched my arms to leave some red marks. Just as I finished, I saw Song Nanny waiting anxiously on the path with a lantern. She looked at me with concern. Miss, you. I gave her a smile, signaling her to keep quiet. As a long-serving servant, she merely bowed her head and silently led the maid brought by Lady Cui to follow behind me. Before we reached the main courtyard, we heard Father's thunderous voice raging inside, mixed with Wen Yan's whimpering sobs. As I entered, my stepmother was gently patting Father's back to soothe him. Before I could speak, Father bellowed, "Wicked daughter, kneel at once." I signaled to Song to wait outside, then stepped into the flower hall and knelt straight down. The hall was brightly lit. Seeing me, Father froze for a moment before his brow furrowed, his tone dripping with displeasure. What on earth has gotten into you now? I timidly glanced up at Wen Yen, then quickly lowered my head. I pulled out a handkerchief to wipe my tears. Saying nothing, Wen Yen clearly noticed my state, now my hair disheveled, tea leaves still clinging to my clothes, faint red marks visible on the back of my hand. Seeing my silence, Father turned to Wen Yen. She shook her head instinctively. Father, I didn't do it. Father eyed her suspiciously. She spoke again. Father. Truly. I didn't do it. I only spilled tea on her. Bravo. That's exactly what I was waiting for. Yes. Father. My sister did nothing else. She merely accidentally spilled tea on me. I sniffled out the words. Who couldn't mimic that petty manner of my stepmother? When Yen, spoiled by father and mother's affection, had always been arrogant and bullying. She hadn't started picking on me just today. It was just that in the past. It all happened within the mansion. Since I never cried or made a fuss, father was happy to turn a blind eye. But today was different. 2 daughters of the mansion went to a banquet. One returned sobbing, the other looking utterly miserable. Father, you promised to take my side. When Yen whined, grabbing his hand when he remained silent. You err. Yenner mentioned the Marquis household has complicated affairs. Do you know anything about this? Father asked me. Father actually believes my sister. I stared at him in disbelief. Father shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my gaze. You are sisters after all. You must support each other in the future. But father, have you considered this? As a young lady confined to the inner quarters, I rarely step beyond the second gate. This time, I only attended the banquet because my sister is the future wife of the heir. Normally, what connection could I possibly have with the Marquis household? My pent-up grievances erupted in an instant. From childhood onward, father had always unconditionally trusted Wen Yen. Even when her words and actions were riddled with inconsistencies, father let out a long sigh. Seeing his attitude soften, stepmother promptly interjected. The eldest daughter's maternal clan is the Chui family of Qinghe. Just as I opened my mouth to speak, Nanny Song entered at the perfect moment. She first bowed to father. Had I not come to teach etiquette this time? This old servant would never have known that a mere concubine could dare to bully the legitimate daughter of the Minister of Right's household. My stepmother's face instantly turned ashen. Clutching her handkerchief, she swayed unsteadily when the late lady passed. The old matriarch wished to take the young lady to live with her. Only because the master said he couldn't bear to part with the memory the lady left behind did we abandon that plan. All these years, we assumed the master's steady rise in court meant the young lady lived well. Yet in the short time I've been here, I've witnessed a concubine ruling the inner quarters, a secondary daughter oppressing the legitimate heir. Minister Wen. Is this the conduct befitting the residence of the Vice Minister of Rights? Song Nanny, an elder who had accompanied her maternal grandmother out of the palace, commanded respect even from court nobles. Her forceful rebuke left her father speechless. Minister Wen. If the Wen household cannot accommodate the young lady, I implore you to intervene. Allow this old servant to take her back to the Grand Dowager when I return. Standing before me with unwavering dignity, Song Nanny remained neither humble nor arrogant, just as she had done in my past life, shielding me from storms with every ounce of her strength. In my past life, guided by my stepmother, I had distanced myself from my maternal grandmother. Whenever she sent messengers, I responded with cold indifference, never initiating correspondence. Gradually, the rift with Lady Chui deepened. I still recall the letter she sent before my marriage, asking if I had chosen this path willingly. She vowed to fight for me if it was not. But back then, I was utterly captivated by the image of Mingzi that Mingli had crafted for me. His every word could stir my emotions for days. Though I vaguely suspected something was amiss in their words, I forced myself to suppress that thought. Filled with anticipation for the future, I simply waited for the wedding day and refused my grandmother's kind offer to send someone to investigate on my behalf. Grandmother was deeply hurt. Yet before my wedding, she still sent me her trusted maid, Song. The straight, upright figure of Song before me overlapped with the hunched form she'd been when she gathered my remains in my previous life. My eyes stung, and tears streamed down uncontrollably. What Song Nanny wished to say was precisely what I wanted to express. But coming from her mouth, it carried the weight of the Chui family's stance, a world of difference. To father, however, This undoubtedly signaled my tacit agreement with Song Nanny's words, or even that I had instructed her to speak thus. Enraged, he swept his sleeves and stormed out. When Yen quickly grabbed her mother's sleeve. "Mother, I haven't finished speaking." Her mother merely shook her head at her. When Yen could only glare at me with hatred. I wiped my tears with my sleeve and flashed her a triumphant smile, nearly making her explode with rage on the spot. When Yen, of course, wouldn't let it go. Her wedding day was approaching. Not only was changing it impossible, but she couldn't bear to give up the position of Crown Prince's consort. After all, once Mingze received his title, she would be the Marquis' wife, set in stone. In her previous life, she had schemed relentlessly, even charging into battle for Mingli, yet she had only barely managed to become the Marquis' secondary wife. This time around, marrying into the Marquis was the best outcome she could possibly scheme for. Even after discovering the Marquis's sordid underbelly at that banquet, she wouldn't give it up lightly, and I was merely delivering her into that den of wolves. How else could I justify having died once in my previous life? What I never could have imagined was that at this very moment, I would encounter someone. This man was audacious enough to break into the residence of the Vice Minister of Rights at night, staring speechless at the strikingly handsome man before me. I couldn't help but feel a headache coming on. This is the Vice Minister of Rights' residence. I know. He sat down with practiced ease, then poured himself a cup of tea without waiting for an invitation. "I sent you a letter, but you never replied. So I came myself. In this life, I only sought revenge against Wen Yan and my stepmother. Then to reclaim everything that belonged to me. I had no desire to be entangled with the Xinyang Marquis household and wished only to keep my distance. That day, when he claimed he was the true heir of the Xinyang Marquis household, it was enough to make me avoid him like the plague. But I never imagined he would just stride right into my courtyard like this. "Don't shout. Even if help comes, I want leave," the man said. "So if you scream, you'll be the one at a disadvantage." I stared at him speechless, stunned that such brazen audacity existed in this world. A headache began to throb. "What do you want?" "My name is Ming Yi," he stated. "Sorry, I don't want to know." I turned my head away. But Ming Yi clearly wasn't going to let me off the hook. "If you keep ignoring me, they'll tell Mingze that you were the one originally meant to marry him." Me. Forget it. Talking to a wall. I turned to head to a stall for the night. But the moment I turned, a heavy thud echoed behind me. Only then did I notice Ming Ye's deathly pale face. Clutching his chest, he sat on the floor, a bitter smile on his lips. "All right. I won't tease you anymore. You're the only person I know in the capital. Help me." It was Mingze who injured Minji. After I helped Minji escape the Xinyang Marquis mansion that day, Mingze had relentlessly sent men to hunt him down. Tonight, Minji sneaked back into the mansion only to fall into a trap Mingze had prepared long ago. Wounded, Ming Yi fled. The Xinyang Marquis residents immediately reported the incident to the authorities, falsely claiming a valuable item had been stolen from the estate. They stationed guards at the city gates. With nowhere else to go, Ming Yi thought of me. The next day, news of the theft at the Xinyang Marquis residence spread throughout the capital. The portrait of the thief drawn by the heir apparent, Ming Zhe, was unmistakably that of Ming Yi. Ming Yi was now a wanted man. When I delivered this news to him, he slammed his fist into the bed frame in fury. "Dishonorable. You might as well shout louder and draw attention to get yourself delivered to the Xinyang Marquis estate." I rolled my eyes. Ming Yi fell silent instantly, as if struck at his weakest point. But while this might fool others, it couldn't deceive Nanny Song. Nanny Song didn't believe a word of Ming Ye's story and immediately tried to drag him to the authorities. Ming Yi, never one to mince words, blurting out that we'd long been mutually enamored. And if he died, I'd surely not survive alone. Then he winked at me. Seeing Matron Song's murderous glare, I feared they might come to blows right then. I could only stay silent, waiting until she left before revealing everything. Fortunately, with matron Song's help, Ming Ye's medicine was secured. With Ming Yi in my room, I had no choice but to feign illness and stay in bed. Who would have thought that Wen Yan, upon hearing this, would unexpectedly insist on visiting me? It was hard not to be suspicious. I'd just hidden Ming Yi in a secret compartment known only to me when Wen Yan arrived, followed by Ming Li. The moment they entered the room, they began looking around suspiciously. Clearly up to no good. Wen Yan even asked if I knew about the theft at the Marquis residence, specifically mentioning the wanted Ming Yi. Clearly, they were after Ming Yi. In the past, they might have simply brought people to the door, but with CUIS people present now, they showed some hesitation. Wen Yan asked if I knew about the theft at the Marquis residence. I shook my head, feigning disinterest. Realizing they weren't getting anywhere, the two of them left shortly after they departed. My sharp eyes spotted an earring lying on the floor where they had been sitting. So, it had been waiting here for me all along. Well, the person I'd originally intended for my concubine would just have to be bestowed upon Wen Yan for now. I immediately sent someone to return the item, denying them any chance to react. When the maid reported Wen Yan's utterly priceless expression upon receiving it, I couldn't help but clap my hands and laugh heartily. Her aunt doted on Wen Yan excessively, spoiling her with a foul temper and neglecting proper guidance. Thus, she possessed some scheming nature, but not much. That night, when I heard a blood-curdling scream from Wen Yan's courtyard nearby, my heart swelled with satisfaction. Even if Wen Yan hadn't provoked me, I wouldn't have spared her. How much less now that she'd come to me willingly, even attempting to frame me. As I hurried over, robed and ready, Wen Yan was sobbing in her aunt's arms. Father stood nearby, seething with rage, while a man on the ground whimpered pitifully, "Auntie, I don't know why I was here. Auntie, it's true. Auntie, save me." The man was none other than Auntie's own nephew, the one she cherished most besides Wen Yan. This wasn't part of my plan, and I felt a pang of confusion. But then, I sensed a burning gaze fixed on me. Following the sensation, I looked up and my eyelids twitched involuntarily. Ming Yi stood cloaked in darkness, his night attire shrouding him, grinning as if demanding credit. So he was the one behind it. I just didn't know when had investigated the Wen household and managed to pinpoint my aunt's nephew. Father was furious. When Yan's wedding date was set, she was to marry into the Ho family soon. Such a scandal at this critical moment. If the Ho household found out, the marriage might be called off. Observing father's expression, mother dared not rashly plead for her nephew's mercy. She could only weep silently by the side, too distraught to spare a thought for Wen Yan. Wen Yan, ever the darling of the household, naturally found this unbearable. She had suffered such profound injustice, yet neither parent comforted her. Father berated her, while mother remained preoccupied with the culprit. She couldn't even vent her frustration freely, all because this person was her cousin. Seeing the figure on the ground gradually fall silent, only whimpering a few times during the beating, I stepped forward. Father, since Yan Yan is unharmed, perhaps we should let it go. If someone had died. The concubine also quickly knelt to plead. Yes, master. There must be some misunderstanding. Father was still boiling with rage and wouldn't let it go so easily. As usual, the concubine knelt and crawled over to tug at his sleeve, just as father's attitude seemed to soften slightly. Wen Yan persisted relentlessly. A misunderstanding. What misunderstanding? He must have lost at gambling again, just like before, and came here to steal my gold and silver jewelry to sell. Hearing this, father violently shook off the sleeve his concubine was tugging. She lost her balance and fell to the ground, blood gushing from beneath her. Someone, help. And so, the incident was buried beneath the joyful news of the concubine's pregnancy. Watching father and Wen Yan, mother and daughter, in their blissful harmony, I slipped away quietly. Soon enough, The harmony they shared now would turn into the hatred they would harbor later. Back in the courtyard, I had barely sat down when Mingyi appeared opposite me. I never knew Miss Wen could be so venomous. What? Scared. If you're afraid, just leave. The door's over there. Good riddance. I smiled at him, yet Mingyi never took the ordinary path. He smiled back at me, not afraid. In fact, I rather admire it. Miss Wen, I find myself increasingly convinced you'd make an excellent future mistress of the Xinyang Marquis household. Pfft. I nearly choked on my tea, staring at him in horror. Don't joke like that. Yet Mingyi's expression was more serious than ever. I genuinely believe we're meant for each other. We both seek to reclaim what was rightfully ours, and well stop at nothing to achieve it. You and I, at our core, we're cut from the same cloth. I was speechless. True, but in this life, I had no desire to enter the Xinyang Marquis mansion. The experiences of my past life were simply too painful. Once my stepmother's pregnancy was secure, when Yan's wedding date drew near, soon after, the physician confirmed she was carrying a son. Father was overjoyed, summoning me to his study for important matters. I knew these important matters were nothing more than elevating my stepmother to primary wife. Father truly doted on my stepmother. But poor mother was used to the fullest before she died in despair. Every ounce of affection and concern father showed my stepmother and Wen Yan was a dagger-piercing mother in my heart. In my past life, these daggers left us utterly shattered. This time around, they became the thorns growing outward wrapping around me, shielding me, protecting me. Since Yaoer is carrying a son, the position of secondary wife is indeed unsuitable. After much consideration, this is the Wen family's only male heir to date. And your only younger brother. He must be granted a noble birthright. Yaoer, why not write to your maternal grandmother? How about granting Yaoer the status of a branch of the Cui family? All these years, she has cared for you diligently, managed the household, and kept your mother's dowry in perfect order. Even if she has no formal merit, her hard work is undeniable, father said earnestly. Moreover, your brother's noble birth will bring you nothing but benefit. Though I orchestrated this plan, hearing my father speak thus still made my heart sink. Have you truly considered this carefully, father? Have you forgotten why mother died? Had that concubine not pushed her that day, Yaoer would have had a brother long ago, and mother wouldn't have died in such despair. Yet now, not only do you intend to elevate her to the position of principal wife, but you also wish to grant her the status of a Cui. Father, this is nothing short of murdering someone's heart. Father's face paled. Then he roared angrily. How dare you, master? The eldest daughter speaks with reason. Perhaps after the son is born, we could adopt him under the lattice name. The concubine stepped out from behind father. Her eyes reddened, still appearing as fragile as a willow in the wind. Miss, I truly meant no harm back then. All these years, I've been atoning for my sins. You may hate me alone, but this child in my womb and Yenner are your younger siblings. I beg you to care for them. The concubine's retreating advance was a masterful speech, striking a chord deep within father's heart. Father reached out and pulled her into his embrace. Yaonyang, you consider me so deeply. Rest assured, in my heart, no one can ever surpass you. I could no longer bear to listen to these words and interrupted them. Since father just mentioned Auntie managing the household affairs, Yaoer has something to say about that. Though mother's dowry inventory and treasury are in my care, the fields and shops have always been managed by you. Auntie, now that you're expecting, you should rest. I've reached the age of maturity, and with Auntie Song's guidance, managing mother's dowry should pose no difficulty. At these words, the stepmother's expression flashed with alarm. What nonsense are you speaking? Yaoer, you're still a young lady, how could you possibly manage such tedious ledgers? I know you're considerate, but truly, this is unnecessary. I fixed her with a strange look. Mother taught me to read accounts when I was very young. Besides, these ledgers were left to me by Mother herself. It is only right that I manage them." My aunt was momentarily speechless. "In that case, Yang, you should organize them for her. Your health is more important now." Father pondered briefly before making his decision. Wen Yan, however, couldn't sit still. Over the years, my aunt had openly and covertly used the harvests from the fields and estates to support her. She hurriedly interjected. "Father, I'll help sister manage them too." Father readily agreed. After reclaiming Mother's fields and shops, I meticulously inspected them with Matron Song's assistance. Matron Song immediately spotted numerous irregularities. She explained that Mother's fields and shops in the capital were prime land and thriving businesses, supported by the Chui merchants. There was no way they could have suffered such losses, let alone necessitating the sale of shops to cover deficits. So angry she was, Nanny Song nearly stormed off to confront my aunt. But I stopped her. "Nanny, please don't rush. I will reclaim every last bit of this." Seeing my confident demeanor, Nanny Song said no more, merely turning to write a letter to my maternal grandmother. Before long, the wedding date for Wen Yan arrived. The Xinyang Marquis household showed the Wen family ample respect. The Wen family lived up to expectations, presenting a dowry of 128 palanquins. Everyone envied Wen Yan's fortunate marriage. Yet, on the day of her return visit to her parents' home, Mingzi did not accompany her. Despite her meticulous makeup, the exhaustion on Wen Yan's face was undeniable. The moment she arrived home, she burst into tears. It turned out that half of the 128 palanquins of dowry had been diverted into the private treasuries of Mingli and Lady Qing upon arrival at the Xinyang Marquis residence. Wen Yan naturally refused to accept this and immediately rejected the arrangement. However, the people she brought with her were firmly restrained by the Xinyang Marquis household, leaving them powerless to resist. She sought out the heir apparent, Mingzi, to cry her heart out, but he treated her with utter indifference, completely lacking the tender affection he had shown before their marriage. Wen Yan had thought of it as simply parting with some wealth to ward off misfortune. Little did she know that the very next day, Mingli and Lady Qing would come knocking on her door with grim expressions. It turned out the jewels and ornaments they had seized from Wen Yan were either gold-plated or silver-plated, and some were even cheap imitations or hollow inside. When Mingli and Lady Qing wore them to a banquet, they were mercilessly mocked by a group of noble ladies and young nobles. Returning home, they angrily threw the jewelry at Wen Yan, then went crying to Mingzi to complain. Wen Yan sought help from Mingzi, but he felt sorry for Lady Qing and Mingli being ridiculed. Poor Wen Yan didn't even know what had happened before Mingzi began to despise her. The concubine comforted Wen Yan while glancing at me with reproach in her eyes. "Young miss, I personally prepared all of Yenner's dowry items. How could this have happened?" I sneered coldly. "Auntie, ask yourself honestly, could the Wen family and your own wealth possibly afford Wen Yan's dowry of 128 palanquins? I merely restored the Wen family and your original possessions." "You." Wen Yan flew into a rage, reaching out to claw at my face. I deftly dodged, leaving her grasping at thin air. "Oh, right. Auntie, now that we've cleared things up, I'll have Auntie Song deliver the bill to you later. After all, I can't possibly replace all 128 pieces of dowry, can I? The shortfall is quite substantial. If it remains unresolved, I'm afraid we'll have to involve grandmother." The concubine fainted on the spot from sheer fury. My side of things proceeded smoothly, while Mingyi kept sending me letters, each one bearing good news. On Wen Yan's wedding day, as planned, I had Mingyi and his men infiltrate the bridal procession. At last, I saw the mad Lady Ho. I congratulated Mingyi on finally reuniting with the Marquis' wife, but he asked in his letter when I would be willing to marry him. I remained non-committal and did not reply. Soon, rumors began swirling throughout the Marquis residence. The love triangle involving Mingzi, Mingli, and Lady Qing was exposed before everyone. If you asked what the hottest storybook was in the capital's tea houses, It would undoubtedly be the affairs of the Xinjiang Marquis household. When Yan finally conceived a child, only to be violently shoved by Ming Li, causing a miscarriage and leaving her permanently barren just as her aunt had done to my mother long ago. As soon as her postpartum confinement ended, when Yan tearfully fled back home, demanding a divorce from Ming Zhe, her father, already overwhelmed by the constant impeachments stemming from the Xinjiang Marquis affairs, was in no mood for her drama. He immediately sent servants to escort her back to the Marquis residence. When Yan resisted, but the maids and servants overpowered her, her stepmother went to console her, reminding her that though the young master was currently worthless, he was still destined to become the Marquis of Xinjiang. Her stepmother's words were meant to comfort Wen Yan, but to her surprise, Wen Yan snarled, "If you hadn't constantly drilled into me that I must marry into a prestigious family, would I have ended up like this? Now that you have a son, have you cast me aside like a discarded pawn?" The concubine was so enraged that night that she suffered a premature labor. But when the midwife hurriedly arrived, the concubine's belly had inexplicably deflated, leaving only a soft, empty skino child inside. The midwife screamed and fainted. Father rushed in to find the concubine staring blankly at her own belly, lost in thought. Father immediately sealed the news, announcing publicly that the concubine had suffered a miscarriage. I swiftly sent out letters, and soon the capital's tea houses were filled with a popular storybook. The heartless scholar who betrayed the noble lady finally gets his just desserts. Indeed, my aunt had never been pregnant at all. I had merely administered a concoction that mimicked pregnancy. What secret potions would be lacking in the Chui family, with its centuries of heritage among the nobility? Yet from that day onward, Father ceased visiting my aunt's quarters, no matter how low she stooped to appease him. Soon, a new concubine entered the Wen household. The old mistress turned white overnight, spending her days calling out, "Wen Lang, Wen Lang." That courtyard soon lay desolate, beyond the bare necessities of food. No one visited the concubine who had once reigned over the Wen household for over a decade. As for the new concubine, she was a Yangzhou courtesan ID purchased long ago, merely delivered to father through the hands of his retainers. I held her deed of ownership, granting her a clean lineage, unless she was utterly foolish. She'd naturally obey my every command. Wen Yan, of course, refused to let it rest. She sought to return home and demand justice for her aunt. But by then, father had a new favorite by his side. He showed no kindness to this daughter who had married into the foul and chaotic Xinjiang Marquis household. Later, he even ordered the servants not to let her set foot in the mansion again. Wen Yuan departed in bitter resentment. Before leaving, she came to beg me, appealing to past ties, to look after her aunt. I sneered coldly. Ties? Have you forgotten that if not for your aunt, my mother would never have died in such despair? Wen Yuan's face drained of color, and she slunk back to the Xinjiang Marquis residence. Meanwhile, storm clouds were gathering over the Xinjiang Marquis estate. After his marriage, Mingzi submitted the customary petition to inherit the Xinjiang Marquis title, only to face repeated suppression. With no other recourse, he sought his father's help. His father, the Vice Minister of Rights, held considerable influence in the court, but Mingzi didn't know that had it not been for the Xinjiang Marquis' sordid affairs dragging him down, his father had been the most promising candidate to succeed the retired Minister of Rights. Now, his ceiling was capped at Vice Minister of Rights. Naturally, his father received him coldly, even lacing his words with sarcasm. Mingzi stormed home, undoubtedly taking his frustration out on Wen Yan once more, tired of the Xinjiang Marquis household becoming a laughingstock. Yet seeing no movement from Ming Ye's side, I couldn't help but send a letter inquiring. Yet Ming Yi merely instructed me to accept Wen Yan's invitation in a few days and visit the Xinjiang Marquis residence. To show sincerity, he also sent 2 martial maidservants. I was surprised Wen Yan still had the mind to send me an invitation when this one arrived. Opening it, I saw it was for Lady Qing's birthday celebration. The scandal surrounding the Xinjiang Marquis residence had spread like wildfire throughout the capital. A banquet was desperately needed to turn the tide. I gladly accepted the invitation. The Xinyang Marquis residence had clearly spared no effort in preparing this banquet. Invitations were sent to nearly every prominent family in the capital. Yet, almost everyone who attended came to witness the spectacle. Seated quietly in a corner, I observed the three figures at the head table: Lady Qing, Ming Li, and Wen Yanand. Recalled the last banquet as if it were a lifetime ago. Suddenly, someone sat beside me. I turned to find Ming Yi had appeared at my side without my noticing. "Why are you here? Aren't you afraid Mingzhou will send men to hunt you down?" I whispered to him. He sidestepped the point. "Are you worried about me? You're sitting this close to me. I'm worried your pursuers might drag me into trouble," I retorted, rolling my eyes at him. Ming Yi fell silent, his gaze fixed on the three figures at the head table. Madame Qing and Ming Li were adept at social maneuvering, while Wen Yan sat like a lifeless wooden doll, utterly devoid of vitality. Amidst the clinking of cups and dishes, a sudden announcement rang out: "The Marquis' wife has arrived." All eyes were drawn to a magnificently dressed noble lady. I glanced at Ming Yi, who wore a faint smile. He looked back at me and gave a wink. Rumor had it this Marquis' wife had been in a daze for over a decade. Now it seemed she had merely been lying low. It seemed the Xinyang Marquis household was about to undergo a seismic shift today. The assembled guests murmured among themselves, their voices tinged with anticipation. With a mere wave of her hand, the Marquis' wife silenced the entire room. Her gaze fell upon Lady Qing, stern and commanding. "I have feigned madness for 16 years, all for this day. Now that my son has returned safely, it is time for everyone to learn the truth." Lady Qing collapsed straight onto the floor. Ming Li, quick-witted, shouted, someone, bring the heir here. The heir, that imposter." The Marquis' wife looked at Ming Li with disdain. "He's likely already been subdued by my son and is being escorted to the imperial prison right now." The long-buried secrets of the Xinyang Marquis household were laid bare. The old Marquis had lived a life of debauchery, obsessed only with beautiful women. Lady Ho, chosen for him by his family, held no respect in his eyes. Later, he found his true love, Lady Qing, but Lady Qing was driven by ambition, seeking only power. On the night of the dowager's delivery, she sent the old Marquis away and substituted a male infant. She planned to use this leverage to control him once he came of age. Yet Lady Ho, born into high society, had meticulously prepared for every eventuality, unwilling to raise the child in such an environment. She seized the opportunity to send him away. That child was Ming Yi. As for herself, she feigned madness and went into hiding, claiming the birth had traumatized her. The entire court was stunned. Who could have imagined such secrets lurking within the Xinyang Marquis household? Suddenly, his past romantic escapades seemed trivial by comparison. Finally, the Marquis publicly read the Emperor's edict. Ming Yi stepped forward, accepted the decree, and formally inherited the title of Marquis of Xinyang. It was a happy ending for all. Those present congratulated the Marquise on her long-awaited joy and Ming Yi on inheriting the title, while I quietly slipped away. The Wen household was now firmly in my grasp. Those who had wronged me in my previous life had all received their punishment. Standing at the entrance of the Xinyang Marquis residence, I felt momentarily dazed. Rain suddenly began to fall. The Wen family carriage was parked some distance away, so the maid by my side went to summon the coachman to bring it to the Marquis's gate. However, shortly after the maid departed, I suddenly felt an overwhelming urge to stand in the rain, soaking myself thoroughly. But no sooner had I stepped out than someone followed, umbrella in hand. "I've been looking for you everywhere. What are you doing here?" Ming Yi asked, completely oblivious. I rolled my eyes. "Ming Yi, do you know why I dislike you?" "Ming Yi, why?" "You always stand on high ground, accustomed to bossing people around. Even when you lower your stance, you remain aloof and superior." "Ill change," Ming Yi murmured, pursing his lips. "No need to change. I shook my head at him, because, no matter what, you and I will never be kindred spirits. Pleasure working with you, your lordship. Wishing you well in the future. I waved at Ming Yi and dashed into the rain, my heart brimming with anticipation for what lay ahead. The story ends here. Thank you for watching. The next one will be even more exciting.